Hi everyone, welcome to Lab for September 8th. Today we want to talk about feasibility related to your research project. Some of you have chosen your topics. Hopefully most of you have, since your topic proposal is due next week. If you haven't, I want to encourage you to schedule a meeting with me or email me for help if you're having trouble. Otherwise, I want to encourage you to put a lot of thought into what your research topic is going to be because it's very important. Part of considering whether a research topic will be good or not is considering the feasibility of answering the question you want to answer. Some considerations you should make when thinking about feasibility are timing, cost, access, and what your options are for getting around these issues. So this is going to be your undergraduate senior research. If you're a senior now, you're currently working on your senior research. That's a few of you. If you're a junior now, or even a sophomore, you have another year or two to work on this project. So it's important that you think about a topic you'll like and that will remain energizing for you throughout that time. A year to 2 years may seem like a drastically long amount of time, but actually it's quite short for a research project, especially because it won't be your only job during that time. You'll have a lot of other commitments that will take your time and energy. So considering how long a project will take is very important. You want to make sure that your research can be done and done well in the time you have. And the more detailed you can be in planning your project timeline, the better off you'll be, because you can plan to do work over the summer, you can plan to do work over winter and spring breaks, you can plan to do work between semesters that will give you a jump start. So knowing when things need to be accomplished by is just as important as knowing how much total time it will take. So think about timing, think about whether you'll have the time to do the research well before you graduate. Another consideration you have to make is how much your project will cost to complete. You should expect your project to be either free or of very low cost to you. We don't expect you to lay out a lot of money for your project. Some funding may be available for your project through different avenues. The school does not typically allot any money to funding senior research. But you may be able to research grants or scholarships or other opportunities through, for example, professional societies to fund your research, if that's something you really need. So if your project has some cost associated, that's not necessarily prohibitive, but you need to consider how much things are going to cost, where cost can come from. Will you need software that you don't have to either create your research instrument or to analyze your results? Will you need to travel to collect the data you really want to collect? Will you need to incentivize participation through paying participants for their responses? There are also alternatives that allow you to buy survey results, where the software company that creates the survey software will allow you to purchase results. So there are lots of ways that costs can rack up. How do you keep the cost manageable for you? Will you have access to the population that you want to study? We've talked about vulnerable populations. In those cases, the Institutional Review Board is likely to deny you access to those populations. You're not likely, for example, to be able to do research on small children, incarcerated persons, pregnant women, persons with mental illness or intellectual disability, patients in a hospital, or anyone who's on a sampling frame because of illegal activity. So you're unlikely to be able to ask people about law breaking, for example. So if you want to interview those populations or survey those populations, you may need to try to find a way to get at that information later, or that information differently. One option for that is retrospective data, meaning you find a person who has formerly been incarcerated and ask them to reflect upon their experience of incarceration. You ask adults to reflect upon their childhood and recall things that happened when they were children. So there are ways to get at your question without interviewing protected populations, sometimes. Um, a way you can really mitigate all of these concerns is by analyzing secondary data or existing data. Secondary data analysis is how a lot of research is done. A few researchers associated with big universities or big research firms will collect data with a lot of funding, often through a grant program, and then will publish that data and make it available for other researchers to analyze. So you can take survey data that already exist, figure out which questions were asked of which respondents, and do new and different analyses with those responses. There are also qualitative studies that exist as secondary data that you can analyze. An example is the ACT UP project, where activists and researchers interviewed people who were involved in a particular social movement around HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s. So those data exist in the form of transcripts of interviews with activists. So you can often analyze secondary data in ways that are novel to answer unique and new questions. Collecting your own data is not the only way to go, and sometimes it's not the most feasible way to go. That said, some of you really want the experience of collecting your own data, and I think that's terrific. If that's the way you want to go, if you want to conduct interviews or do content analysis or create a survey and field it, I think that's a good thing to do, and I will help you do it the best that we can, given the constraints of time, cost, and access. Please email me or schedule a meeting to discuss any questions you have about the feasibility of your project. And remember, when filling out Lab Exercise 1, to discuss the feasibility of your project in some detail. So please let me know if you need help. Otherwise, I will talk to you. I'll see you in the discussion forums and communicate with you there. And we will talk to each other again on Tuesday.